This is a very simple issue tracker where people can post the issues they're having. You can submit one by filling all these fields and hitting save. What I'd like to do is, instead of directly creating the post, to show a preview page with the information we have just filled in. Once on that page, we can review what we've just typed and then create a post. I already have some specs for what I've just shown you. Basically, making a request to the new action renders the new template, which is where our form is located. The render template assertion is provided by the Rails controller testing gem. This used to be part of Rails core at one point. Normally, you would test the action by just looking at its HTTP status code, which is the reason why it was extracted out to a gem. But we'll use it because it will make the tests we'll be writing more consistent and easier to understand. Lastly, there are some specs for the create action, which are fairly straightforward. I'm making sure that a record is indeed created and we're redirected to it. And if there's an error, we would re-show the template with the form for the user to correct, as we've seen earlier. The page preview will need to lie somewhere in between the new and create actions, so I'll actually create it here. This of course needs to be accessible under routes. I'm defining it as a post because I think it will end up looking a lot like the create action. In typical TDD fashion, let's write a spec for the newly defined action. For now, we just want to render the preview template and show the user their submitted data. The input is submitted to this action just like we do for create, and then we render the template. Let's extract the duplicated params and run the spec. I expect this new test to fail, which it does. The preview is just like the create action after an error, but instead of displaying the ticket information as fields in a form, it should be shown as plain text. We'll also need to create a preview ERB template. I'll just copy some code from the show action. The created@, attribute is set after the record is inserted in the database, so let's replace it with the current time. Next, we need to forward the data to the create action. So let's make a button somewhere which says create and point it to tickets create. Tickets path won't point to index because button 2 under the hood wraps a button tag into a form, so this will make a post request. We still need to send the ticket information. I'm going to pass it as the query string, but there's a caveat to it. If I use ticket params ticket, Rails will complain because the params are not marked as permitted. Explicitly marking it as unsafe would work and, despite its name, be secure, but I'll give Rails what it wants and use the permitted params I've used in the controller instead. For this to work, I'll just need to expose it as a helper method. We'll also need to update the form to point to the preview action rather than create. Let's try the specs. They pass. And now let's have a look over what we wrote in the browser. The ticket body is shown as markdown, so we should be able to see how this is going to get rendered. It looks like it's working fine. However, I'd like to show this page only if the record is valid, that is, when these fields are filled in. Otherwise, we see this confusing empty preview. How would we write this in a test? Similar to create, if we're passing invalid data, this should render the new template. Now let's see this spec fail. To fix this, we want to render the new template if the ticket is not valid. Otherwise, this action will fall back to using the preview template as before. The specs pass. Now it's time to have a look over what we've done in the browser. Passing no data re-renders the form just like in our spec. And if we fill everything in, the preview page gets rendered. Let's improve the user experience a bit by making a link that will grant users the ability to return to the form and not rely on the browser's back button. This is similar to the create button, however, it should point to the new action. And considering new is accessible as a get, I'll keep things simple and use a plain link. The new action instantiates an empty ticket. When we first see the form, we don't have any params, so we just can't pass the ticket params directly. So I'll do something else. Check for the ticket params and use assign attributes to pass them in. Let's have a look. The form has been filled again with the params we have passed in the query hash. This looks good, but let's do more. We might want a custom validation for the confirmation page, for example, a checkbox saying we have accepted the terms of service. Specs-wise, we need to make sure that if we're passing invalid data to create, it will render the preview page and not new. Specs are failing as we wanted them to. To fix them, we just need to change the template name. Awesome. Next, how can we add the terms and conditions checkbox? This needs an actual form, so we just can't use the button 2 helper here. Let's copy the form from the new page and point it to the create action. We don't need to show the fields, so we can just hide them. I'll just name this to be a bit more explicit. I'm going to create a checkbox and call it terms of service. I'll also name its label to something more meaningful. Bear in mind that we need 2 validations to happen. The regular one, when we're coming from the new page, it's the one we currently have in place. And another one that also checks for this checkbox when we're coming from the preview page. To distinguish between the two, I'll create another hidden field named required terms of service and pass in a truthy value. We'll need to whitelist these attributes in order to access them in the model, which is where we also need to define them. But first, let's indent this nicer. I'll start by creating 2 virtual attributes. Basically, we want to check that the terms of service have been checked only if the secondary requires attribute exists. There's a problem with this code though. Checkboxes are sent as either 1 or 0, which are both truthy values. However, if these were stored in a database rather than being class accesses, Rails would do this conversion for us, changing 1 to true and 0 to false. We can get around this by using the Rails Attributes API and defining them as booleans. Let's also change the required terms of service hidden field to 1, which is the boolean for true, so we don't leave anything to chance. It's time to have a final look over what we've built. If we don't check anything, the confirmation page is shown again. And if we check it, the ticket gets created. Cool. There are multiple ways of building a preview page, such as passing data using sessions, saving the record as a draft and publishing later, or maybe just doing it in the front end. Passing query params as we just did is just one way of doing it, and choosing the right one is entirely depending on what you're building. So choose wisely. Thanks for watching.